Thank you all for being with us to participate at this 107th, I believe it is, 107th event of the Sri Lankan Literary Society event. A distinguished speaker is awaiting to share her unique experience with you today, but let me, as the chair, fulfill some of my obligations to you. First and foremost, I thank Ruan, Dr. Ruan de Soysa, for convening this meeting. I was expecting him to chair the session, but he appears to have taken a break in sunny Sri Lanka, dodging the event. And he had asked me to deputize for him. He does, of course, deserve a breakthrough after all his hard work, particularly in recent times, talking to individuals through SLLS, WhatsApp, phone channels. Next, I must thank Dr. Mahendra Gonçalves, without whose studious technical input, this program would not be viable. So Mahendra, thank you. And of course, I'm not going to miss out the speaker, that is Frederica Jansz, for taking the time and giving up a Sunday morning because it's around 9 o'clock, I think, in Seattle, USA. So once again, Frederica, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Of course, I have already had problems starting the Zoom because I wanted to do it on my larger screen on my desktop. And I had it ready about half an hour ago. But then when I tried it again now, it took me to another Zoom event that I organized some time ago. And I couldn't get out of it, hence the delay. So to all of you, and also Frederica in particular, my apologies for the delay. Again, in the event of unforeseen problems with technology, we have Mahendra and Ruan at hand to help us out. And they both have your contact details, Frederica, so that they can contact you directly through WhatsApp, should things go wrong, hopefully not.
Okay.
Maybe as the chair, I will now seek your indulgence for a few moments to make some observations about the title of Frederica's talk. I think it's important I clarify that. The title mentions the word formidable, but it doesn't tell you anything about the speaker's vocation or her expertise. But that was deliberate because the word formidable was introduced by myself. And when I passed the title by Frederica, she was very humble in asking me, or at least telling me, that she doesn't think that she is a formidable woman. But I had a reason for that. And let me put this in perspective. Around the time the late Lasantha Wickramatunge was slain by the so-called unknown gunmen, there were others too who were punished by death. A country that despises capital punishment goes on to slay people in the said fashion. And Lasantha was not the only one, but he was one of many. Names like Eheliagoda comes to my mind. So are other names. Some of the names are, I'm sure, will be familiar with the SLLA members, but I suspect not all, because there were some 31 journalists who were killed by unknown assassins at the time, around the beginning of the millennium. Of the 31, I think 22 were Tamils. They all came from the north and the east, and there was no reason for the South to know that because it wasn't important news. But anyway, that is just to put the whole thing in perspective. And of the 31 men who were slain, through very violent means, but of course instantaneous. I think Lasantha, if I remember right, was taken to hospital and he died there, but most of the deaths came about quickly. Perhaps the assassins wanted to do it with minimal time and make it least painful. Not one among them was a woman, not one, all men. And there wasn't a woman who ventured into investigative journalism, taking on this type of work to probe and to tell the truth to the nation, except, I mark the word except, one woman, that was Frederica Jansz, hence the title. Now, I got a few more observations to make. I will move on now and invite all the members gathered here to observe a minute's silence in memory of the dead, the departed, as a mark of respect. The 1 minute starts now. Thank you very much. I will move on to make a formal introduction. Frederica's name is nothing strange. I'm sure all of you would have known her at least by reading the newspapers. A well-known and perhaps, as I mentioned earlier, the only female investigative journalist of high caliber at the time, going back to the early millennium. A well-known editor whose education was at Methodist College in Colombo. She went on to study journalism later at St. Thomas Aquinas University and began her career as a television print journalist. The pinnacle of her achievement was when she was appointed as the editor-in-chief of the Sri Lankan broadsheet English Daily. Not daily, it was a weekly paper I'm referring to, the Sunday Leader, taking on the mantle from Lasantha Wickramatunge. After that, she rather ventured into very dangerous territories about which she will be telling herself. I don't want to steal the thunder from her. But she had to pay a heavy price with a persistent mental torture, all of which she will reveal. So on that note, I will now invite her, but suffice would it be for me to say, I'm not going to read through her whole CV, but I will pick a few things during the discussion time, because that will be an interactive process which will make the whole thing more interesting. But perhaps I could make a request. I would prefer you to keep your questions till the end of her delivery. I believe she's going to talk to us for anything between 10 to 15 minutes, after which we will have plenty of time for the discussion, questions, and even criticism, should there be any. She will be very open. So keep your questions to yourself for the moment. You can send them on chat line if you want, so that we can collate them. Otherwise, you can come back at the end of a talk to fire the questions at her, because you're going to learn it all from the horse's mouth now. On that note, Frederica, the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Sati, for that. So let me begin. First, I mean, as Sati has just said, I was the form editor for the Sunday Leader newspaper in Sri Lanka. If I were to add just one more thing to what Sati was just saying in his introduction, is that my proudest achievement so far has been that of the role of being a mom. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak to you all today. And again, as Sati has already told you, for weeks after he generously extended this invitation, I struggled with my inner thoughts and feelings, somewhat at a loss, trying to decide how best to encapsulate my experiences in Sri Lanka and subsequently here in Seattle, in America. How best to say it to you all. I finally made a decision to say it as I see it, a policy we have always followed at the Sunday Leader, to call it as it is. Often during my tenure as a journalist, I would be asked repeatedly why I did it, why I risked my life for some of the very sensational investigative stories I broke. Consistently, during my 24 years as a journalist, I have received multiple death threats. I have been harassed, threatened, and intimidated. Sorry. Not long after I took over as editor of the Sunday Leader in March of 2009, I received a death threat written in bright red ink in Sinhala, which when translated read, "Bitch, we will chop you up if you continue to write." I laughed it off. The threats continued. In those threats, sorry, almost always, interestingly, I would be called a prostitute, a phenomena common in Sri Lanka where gender inequality reigns supreme in a society that is proud of its patriarchal status or status. I'm sorry, I'm already saying some words like they say it in America here. But even as I shrugged off these threats, my uneasiness began to grow, manifesting itself one evening when I was followed home by a man on a motorcycle as he threateningly swerved repeatedly into my car. This was after Lasantha Wickrematunge had been murdered by unidentified men, also on motorbikes. This person followed me to my house when suddenly I made a split decision. I swung my car around and chased him back up the road. He least expected to become the pursued and raced away, but not before I had called police and reported his license plate number. They caught him a couple of hours later and asked me to come identify him. At the police station, I was told he was a naval rating based at a camp on Sri Lanka's east coast. He begged me not to pursue charges, cowering in fear like the coward he truly was. The next morning, 2 senior naval officers showed up at the police station and got him bail. The investigation was almost immediately dropped. I only relate this incident because it captures what has become the paradigm shift for media in Sri Lanka. Nevertheless, despite this incident and continuing death threats, I continued, but with a new awareness, constantly looking over my shoulder, constantly checking my driving rearview mirror. Ultimately, for journalists in Sri Lanka, it comes down to this: the story or your life. No journalist should ever have to make that choice. But in Sri Lanka, this has become par for the course. At the Sunday Leader, we literally chose the former. It was always the story, a decision the newspaper paid the ultimate price when its founding editor, when Lasantha Wickrematunge was murdered as he drove to work on a Thursday morning. A decision that other editors at the newspaper have paid for when they were forced into exile, myself included. But while we all worked at the newspaper, we were determined to say it as we saw it. The Sunday Leader, true to its trademark motto, unbowed and unafraid, has exposed what no other newspaper in Sri Lanka has dared to do. The corruption, nepotism, the lack of governance, the replacement of the rule of law by the rule of the armed thug with political protection, the demise of press freedom, the dismantling of democracy and its replacement by a fascist state, or worse, a totalitarian state where the rulers and their stooges do not recognize the word accountability. On July 5th, 2012, I called Gotabaya Rajapaksa, who was then Defense Secretary, to ask him whether he was aware that a Sri Lankan Airlines plane was to be downsized to enable a junior pilot who was dating Rajapaksa's niece to fly a puppy from Zurich to Colombo for his wife. Some 56 passengers would have had to be offloaded with a consequent loss of revenue to the taxpayer, which was a matter of public concern. Mr. Rajapaksa said, and I quote here, I have to please ask you to excuse the language, but I am quoting him. I will sue your fucking newspaper if any of this is published. He went on in gutter language. Your type of journalists are pigs who eat shit journalists. He screamed, he was screaming. And then he added to me, you dirty fucking shit journalist. He also said, if you and I were at the same party, cocktail party, he said 90% of the people in that room would want to see you dead. I published the entire interview in an article titled Gotha Goes Berserk. Following this article, Friday Forum, a civilian group in Colombo with some distinguished people in it, called for the sacking of Gotabaya Rajapaksa. But there was no way that the de facto president would be replaced by his brother. It was much more likely that the newspaper, the Sunday Leader, would be silenced. And that is exactly what happened on Friday, September 21st, 2012. The newspaper was taken over by a businessman, Asanga Seneviratne, who sacked me. There has been speculation as to whether I resigned or was sacked. I did not resign. My contract was terminated with immediate effect on that Friday, September 21st. It followed after Asanga Seneviratne told me that articles carried in the main section of the Sunday Leader are slanderous and malicious of the first family, his words, not mine, and degrade the president. He asked me to stop being critical of the Rajapaksas and even stop carrying cartoons depicting the president in lighter vein. He then took strong objection to two nutshells carried in the newspaper on Sunday, September 16th, which he later, when he made a police complaint, together with Sajin Vasgunawardana against me, said that these two nutshells not only embarrassed him, but could evoke public emotions and incite violence against the president. The two nutshells in question were age-old jokes rephrased to suit the local political situation. I maintained to Seneviratne that the Sunday Leader had no personal or political agenda against the president, nor any other politician or individual, but that the type of journalism we practice is independent and devoid of any bias. That we as journalists are merely performing our duty in acting as messengers, holding those in political and public office accountable. But Seneviratne refused to understand or accept this position. I then had conveyed to him that I had no intention of resigning, given that I had done no wrong, that he could terminate my services if he so wished, which is exactly what he did. It is crucial to appreciate that what was done is not just the silencing of a newspaper that has repeatedly and consistently every week questioned the activities of the ruling junta, present and past. It is evidence of a fascist dictatorship. a totalitarian regime that is in power in Sri Lanka, that remains in power to date. For decades, Sri Lanka has needed a free press, journalists who are critical of its continuing authoritarian regimes, journalists who will not hesitate to end impunity for those who harass and kill their opponents, including members of the press. Both during and since my 24 years as a journalist in Sri Lanka, I have watched as more and more repressive tactics are deployed. I remember only too well the white vans and guns. Now they use arrest warrants, brute force, and massive disinformation campaigns that have large portions of Sri Lanka's public criticizing the news media. I recall the times we were labeled as terrorists by Gotabaya Rajapaksa. The time he mocked us when the Bar Association of Sri Lanka issued a formal statement in our defense. Gotabaya accused us of running to our nannies. We wore that label of being called terrorists with pride, because if that is what it took for the government and its sycophants to sit up and take note of what we were reporting, then it was worth it. I remember like it happened yesterday, the day that Lasantha Wickrematunge was murdered. It is now 14 years since I stood by and watched helplessly. I watched him die on a cold, hard metal hospital bed. I remember the day I visited Keith Noyer, then editor of the Nation newspaper, also my friend and colleague, as he lay bruised, bloodied, and battered in a hospital bed. I remember the day in April 2005, when I learned with shock of the callous, brutal murder of well-known Tamil journalist Taraki Sivaram, or Siva, as I fondly called him. He had also been a friend and colleague with whom I had worked closely for many years. And long before any of this happened, I remember I was a mere cub reporter at the time when Richard de Souza was murdered. At the time, I shared an office with Richard, and I recall only too well the night he disappeared. Most of all, I remember distinctly his mother, Dr. Manorani Saravanamuthu. She was tall and very beautiful, and I remember how she carried herself with incredible strength through that horrific time from the moment we received news that his body had been found on a beach in Colombo. Richard's murder was my first introduction to what was to become for me a regular cycle to bear witness to consistent violence, death, assault, harassment, and threats perpetrated against journalists in Sri Lanka. This is Sri Lanka's shameful history, which human rights organizations have year after year called a pattern of gross human rights violations, where journalists have lived the horrors of being among the persecuted, victims of the most horrendous state-sponsored crimes, while Lasantha's killers, Keith's assailants, my abuser, and a dozen other perpetrators of hate crimes committed against journalists walk free. The media in Sri Lanka continue to work in a culture of impunity, a culture where there is no accountability, a society where journalists have to self-censor to stay alive. Critical journalism in Sri Lanka is dead, not because there are no longer brave men and women to do this honorable job, but because more and more it has become unsafe. A culture where the government continues to wage war against the media. Since Gotabaya Rajapaksa became president in 2019, he suppressed investigations where he literally turned police detectives into criminals. So much so that one remains under house arrest while another fled the country. Military personnel accused of murder have become victims of persecution under Rajapaksa. The man who, according to investigators, operated military death squads during his tenure as defense secretary, who, according to Ahimsa Vikramatunga, ordered her father's assassination, went on to become Sri Lanka's president, legitimately elected, until he was literally thrown out of office. But the saga did not end there, as we all know. This man is today back in the country and lives a life which, by all accounts, is free of any accountability. Bloodied, bruised, and beaten into submission, Sri Lanka's media cannot be blamed for playing safe. I can personally testify to the nightmare that is the reality of fleeing your homeland just to stay alive. I arrived in the US in 2012, in October 2012, as a single mom with 2 young children. If I, for even a second, thought my fight for life was over, I could not have been more wrong. It had just begun. This time, the playing field was very different and very foreign. I was no longer a terrorist, but an alien. It was the official term on paper, and the term so fit our existence at the time. We were indeed aliens. And so as I battled in this country to survive, to create a safe and secure home for my 2 young sons, there have been times I have wanted to run again, when I have been too utterly exhausted to believe anymore that I could continue. Of course, things got better, but in a country where society functions mainly around the traditional family concept, as a single parent, I struggled for years. I soon realized I needed to reinvent myself, earn an American degree to get hired, and ditch my journalism mantle, a profession which I had pursued for 2 decades and firmly believed was my vocation in life. I'm going to relate to you a meeting I recall here, a coffee meeting I had with the managing editor of the Seattle Times, one of the biggest and most reputable newspapers in Seattle. He told me that he really wanted me on his staff, but needed to find the right opening. He urged me to apply for different job descriptions at the newspaper. And I did. I was shortlisted on 3 occasions, but never got hired. It was a bitter pill to swallow, to be told by him that few of those applying for those same positions could compete with my experiences, but that since I had no contacts in the US or sources, the all-important tool for any journalist, it was a huge negative. After about the 6th attempt, I gave up. Clearly, this man could not convince his board to hire me, despite the fact that I had so much experience, that I had literally begun my career as a war correspondent and covered a very bloody and brutal war waged in Sri Lanka for over 2 decades. I decided I needed to focus on my new career. I had started out in residential design. I had gone back to school, to the Seattle Art Institute, from which I graduated with a degree in applied arts and interior design in 2017. I got hired almost immediately. And during a 6-year period, I learned a lot, but I hated it. I struggled for years working for companies I was not happy in, feeling very much a square peg in a round hole. If ever there was a situation where I was the wrong fit, this was it. More and more, I yearned to return to what had been my passion, journalism. I began to source other jobs, including jobs that called for writers. I had meanwhile posted my design portfolio online. And suddenly, in August of 2021, I got a call out of the blues from a woman who asked to set up an interview time with me to discuss the possibility of hiring me as a designer to design schools in the US. I was completely taken aback. I told her I had no experience in commercial design. This was a whole different playing field, a whole different ball game. She responded it did not matter, that I still had the required skill set, I had the education. A 30-minute interview lasted 1 hour. And at the end of that hour, I knew I had the job, even though I still needed to go through another 3 interviews. The only reason I tell you this is because if ever there was a turning point for me here in the US, this was it. This was my big break, the one I had thought would never come. I am currently a year and a half into this job. I have designed multiple schools in the states of Washington, Oregon, Utah, Texas, New Jersey, and New York. I love my job, and I remain in constant admiration of my peers. For the first time since I arrived in this country, my self-worth and dignity has been restored. For the first time, I work in an environment where I am once more respected and appreciated for my skills. It took me a decade to get here. I can argue, and I often do with my American friends when I slip unconsciously into my other self, that of a journalist. We debate the significant shifts that have occurred in the US over these last few years, particularly since the pandemic. We have all grown more negative of society in this country. Society in America has become increasingly polarized based on political views. It has become harder to compare material well-being, including references to feeling safe and secure and able to cover the basics, living comfortably or being well off. But then I have only to open any one of my social media apps to be reminded on a daily basis Sri Lanka's spectacular political downfall and its ongoing downward economic spiral, which offers yet another unmistakable reminder, one that we consistently espoused at the Sunday Leader: good governance, both political and economic, and accountability matters. The overthrow by ordinary Sri Lankans of an irresponsible government that bears responsibility for decades of mismanagement wasn't a revolution. It was instead the result of frustrated Sri Lankans' desperate outcry against policy failure caused by an utterly irresponsible government and the country's longtime political dynasty. Sadly, from a broader perspective, and from where I am sitting, the country's unfolding saga has turned out to be a classic case of a train wreck in slow motion. I read online recently some notes by a respected Indian foreign policy scholar, where he said for much of nearly 2 decades, the 4 Rajapaksa brothers and their sons have run Sri Lanka like a family business, and a disorderly one at that. With their grand construction projects and spendthrift ways, they saddled Sri Lanka with unsustainable debts, driving the country into its worst economic crisis since independence. Now the dynasty has fallen. Currently, there does appear to be an orderly transition plan underway to create an interim government via a legal parliamentarian process. However, ordinary Sri Lankans will be forced to pay, and I hear this all the time from Sri Lankans who remain in touch with me almost daily, how they are being penalized, forced to pay acutely high prices for this abrupt transition, given the fact that there is going to be a prolonged and profound economic mess for the foreseeable future. I mean, this is a country that has been crushed by the loss of tourist revenue over the past 5 years, in addition to gross economic mismanagement and now runaway inflation. So really, the prospects for Sri Lanka remain quite bleak. My heart breaks for a country I consistently said I would never leave. During my tenure as editor at the Sunday Leader, when interviewed on multiple occasions by foreign news agencies, I would insist I was proud to be Sri Lankan. I no longer know what that even means. Am I proud to now be American? I don't know. I am grateful, very grateful, but these are 2 very separate things. Did America give me the will to survive, to transform myself and my children in accordance with its push to always do better, to be the best? Yes, it did. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Frederica. Can I ask everyone whether I'm audible?
Yes, can hear you, Tati.
Yes, thanks very much. I think Ruan has left. Probably might join us again. I think it's time to put our questions, if any, to Frederica. Maybe using chairman's privilege, I will fire off first. Frederica, you mentioned about feeling Sri Lankan. Can you just go a bit deeper into that? Why would you feel Sri Lankan or not feel Sri Lankan, or the extent of feeling Sri Lankan should matter? Because you were a victim of circumstances. You were a victim of a regime that basically practiced hatred, moving away from the same philosophy on which they were elected into power. But then they were not strange, were they? We have seen it right from the beginning, since independence. We blame the foreigners for treating us this way and that way. But have we done anything better? We haven't. Everything started since independence. Nepotism grew, and that has taken a parallel if you compare it to the West. I mean, today we heard, or at least yesterday, I think, we heard that one of the most powerful member of the cabinet, or members of the cabinet, had to quit in UK. Why? There was a degree of wrongdoing. So why would you bring the issue of Sri Lankanness to into consideration because we have been treated badly? The people, some people treated you badly, but did Sri Lanka treat you badly?
Okay, so let me explain. So I will always be Sri Lankan. I was born Sri Lankan. Nothing changes that. There is a difference, though, in being Sri Lankan and in being proud to be Sri Lankan or proud to be anything else. Because what do we associate that pride with? I mean, when I said that all the time I was in Sri Lanka, and I would consistently say that phrase, I am so proud to be Sri Lankan, it was because I identified with integrity, with accountability. You know, I think I was in an environment where I believed change was possible and that it was happening. So, I mean, I can go on, but now sitting on, you know, from the looking from inwards, from the outside, I am now an outsider in that sense. What do I identify with? Because for me, these values, these principles are very important, you know, and this is not to say that there is a lack of, there is no integrity with other Sri Lankans. That is not what I am saying. This is about me and being able to identify with the country of my birth, or I do identify, but being able to be proud to be Sri Lankan. And I just don't know anymore, because the whole moral fabric of Sri Lankan society, I'm so sorry, has broken. It is not about just a few people persecuting me, harassing me, or the fact that I was a victim. It's not about that. This is about, I am speaking when you can identify with the country, be proud with everything it stands for. And I just don't know anymore. I don't know. So that was pretty much, I hope I answered your question, Sati, but that was kind of what I was trying to say there.
Thank you very much for speaking out. I take a slightly different view because I haven't gone through the experience you have, but I have been asked very challenging questions by my own friends. And I take the view that I'm as Sri Lankan as they are. And the question of minority and majority doesn't arise in my mind because I am as Sri Lankan as they are. And that is my normal response to them, because why should I feel second class just because somebody feels that they are superior? If not, that's basically an issue that swings like a pendulum between chauvinism and hatred. But why should we give into that? And for that reason, I would have thought you should not feel like that, but you should feel as Sri Lankan as I am and as the members of the SLLS are. But anyway, that's a thought.
It's not about, just a quick clarification, it's not about not feeling Sri Lankan. Like I said, I will always be Sri Lankan. Nothing changes that. It's about being proud. There's a difference here. It's when we utter that phrase, are we proud to be Sri Lankan or American or British or whatever it is, whatever metal, what do we identify that pride with? That's really what I'm saying here. Anyway.
Thank you very much. I think I saw Uditha raising his hand. Uditha, you want to come in?
Yeah, hi. Sorry, I have got many questions, but
can you introduce yourself, Uditha?
yeah, I'm Uditha Jayatunga, living in Derby. In my book, which I have sort of discussed with in a WhatsApp forum, in my book, I feel that the only reason Gotabaya wanted to become president was to escape from justice, because he wanted the presidential immunity to buckle all the investigations and stop them. And this is amplified. It was obvious that during the 50-day government, the first thing he did, they were not even in power at that time. The first day he did was to sack Nishant Silva. And when he became president, the first thing he did was to sack Shani Abesekara. So it is obvious that the only reason why Gotabaya wanted to become president was to escape from the crimes he has done. What do you think about that?
I cannot disagree with you. That is very possible. I mean, it's a viewpoint, it's a perspective that I don't disagree with. Is it fact? I don't know. But it's, of course, it is extremely possible. Yes. This is a criminal. This is a war. This is a person who has committed war crimes. You know, as I said, I mean, this is a person who investigators said not only hired but masterminded and ran death squads in Sri Lanka. Death squads that, like I said when I was speaking, also killed journalists. So yes, perhaps he needed to be president in order to be able to have complete immunity. That is, I don't disagree. That is a possibility.
We are talking about many crimes, many murders, many white van crimes, and many things. Of course, if you look at those, maybe hundreds of people would have been involved in one way or the other. Most of them are in the forces and others. As a country, we need to prove only one crime to put this man behind the bars. Yes, when he was in power, people would have been scared or worried to give any evidence against him. Now that he is not in power, what do you think? Can we hope justice for people who have died, and for him to have what he deserves for the crimes he has done?
Certainly not as long as Ranil Wickremesinghe remains president. No. Gotabaya Rajapaksa will not be brought to justice. No.
Who will, do you think, will bring him to justice? Which group in your mind? Because as a country we need answers. We need to solve these crimes. Surely for Lasantha and many others, the justice should be done. And who will do that in your mind?
That's a very good question. Thank you. And that's a big question, because who is there? You see, again, this is what I was saying. The moral compass in Sri Lanka is, there is no moral compass, right? There is no integrity, there is no accountability among any politician. So when you ask me who, I really don't know. Who is independent enough, who is strong, courageous enough to come forward and actually hold these people accountable? I honestly don't know, because we have seen with successive regimes in Sri Lanka that this lack of accountability, the culture of impunity continues. It really does not change. So I don't have an answer to your question as to who could bring in that change and actually bring justice for all the many crimes that Gotabaya and Mahinda and dozens of others have committed in that country.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yulisa. Can I now move on to Mahendra?
Thank you very much, Satish, for giving me the opportunity to speak to Frederica. And I have to say straight away that I have always been a great admirer of you, Frederica. Your courage and what you have done is something that is unique. And certainly from the way you behaved as a Sri Lankan, I was very proud to be a Sri Lankan. So, that brings me to this question of being Sri Lankan and being proud. I don't know whether you agree with me. Being Sri Lankan from birth, like you and I, is a fact. I mean, you can't take that away from me. Whether you are proud or not depends on your concept of Sri Lankan, which can vary with time. For example, if the current regime is replaced with a honest regime which restores law and order, rule of law, justice, transparency, then I'll say I'm proud to be a Sri Lankan. So I think that to be proud depends on circumstances and context at the moment.
Correct. That is exactly what I was saying. Yes.
Okay. Other thing is, I'm always fascinated by people like you who are leaders and who take huge risk, personal risk to your own life to do things that lots of people will shy away from. What is your driving force? What makes you do it? What makes you take these dangerous tasks and challenges? Is it a journey where you see a destination, or you just want to go on a journey?
You know, as I said when I was speaking earlier, I was asked this question many times, and thank you for asking it so that I can further clarify it. I mean, at the time, yes, it's a journey. I did see a light at the end of that dark tunnel, because I believed that we were actually making change, that we were changing the way society thought and acted. You know, when I saw those thousands of people last year overrunning the presidential palace, and in an attempt to overthrow Gotabaya. For me, that moment was so symbolic of everything we had fought for at the Sunday Leader, because we, during the Sunday Leader's 18-year existence, I should actually say the 14 years during the time of Lasanta's and my tenure, we fought, we wanted civil society to be galvanized, to take action against these, like I said, totalitarian regimes, these very corrupt fascist regimes. And it finally happened. You know, I mean, sure, the Sunday Leader was no longer around, and I'm not trying to take any credit for that people's movement, which was incredible. But hopefully, even in a very small way, even if it was to a niche part of Sri Lankan society, we helped in that journey. So when you ask me why I did it, why I took the risks that I did, because I firmly believed in that journey. I never for one moment doubted that journey when I was on that road.
So is it driven by a deep sense of morality of what is right and wrong, and what a duty of a citizen is, a duty of a human being who has a capacity possibly to institute change and to take that chance even at the risk of his or her own life? Such a deep sense of morality, of right and wrong, and optimism in a way that you have the capacity to induce change and achieve change. That's all that come in.
100%, yes. And again, you know, if I were to go back to this whole thing about being proud of being Sri Lankan, yes, we are driven by those principles in life, right, which govern our every action. It's morality, it's integrity, it is accountability. I mean, these are values that fashion you, that make you as a human being, that drive you in your purpose in life, that make whatever path you have chosen worthwhile, that gives meaning to what you are doing in life. So yes. And this is why Lasantha did it too. I mean, I think in that final editorial that was published after his death, it said that many times he had been offered a chance to leave the country. You know, he had already moved his family out of the country, but he never went, because Lasantha firmly believed that as long as he stayed, he could make that change happen, that change that we were all working towards.
So
yes.
Forgive me for asking this, but in some cases, people who take the risk and who do amazing things, consciously or subconsciously, are driven also by a great view of the world, shall I say, a religious or spiritual view of something more than just what is apparent. Were you driven by anything like that, or consciously or subconsciously?
I cannot say that it was spiritual or religious, no. However, this was something somebody at the Sunday Leader said to me when I was editor, that we were 20 years ahead of Sri Lanka. We were too early for Sri Lankan society, which was why so many people in Sri Lanka found the Sunday Leader so unpalatable too. So yes. I mean, again, I wouldn't go so far as to say there was any spiritual or religious. I'm speaking only from my perspective. I cannot speak for anybody else at the Sunday Leader in that respect. But it was just, you know, we were, and this is something I firmly believed and consistently said at the Sunday Leader. Why be a journalist? When you are a journalist, you are a watchdog for the nation. And if you are not willing to don that or wear that mantle with integrity, with purpose, and be a messenger and be a watchdog for society, then you shouldn't be a journalist. Now, having said that, I have to again repeat what I said previously. And that is, you know, when today, for example, like I said, there is no critical journalism being practiced in Sri Lanka. But that is not because there are no brave men and women left in the media. They are there, but you know, currently they've got to choose the story or their life. And like I said earlier, nobody, no journalist should ever have to make that choice.
Thank you. Sati, only one more observation, then I'll stop because I'm sure many more want to ask questions. Personally speaking, when the Aragalaya came and it ousted the president, and I saw interreligious, interethnic harmony, people rising up, I really thought, this is it. Sri Lanka is going to be saved now. We have something that's going to happen. I have been very grossly disappointed by subsequent events. Do you share my view, or do you still think that things will happen?
I agree with you. But look, like I said, this wasn't a revolution. This was just very frustrated Sri Lankans, you know, who took to the streets in total despair. I mean, yes, they were angry as well, but they were just so frustrated. So for it to continue, you see, unlike a revolution, which is more better organized and can continue, this was not a revolution. So that is the difference here. And also, again, I mean, they got attacked, right, soon after. I mean, how much longer can people take getting beaten up, arrested? You know, even these people were just operating in a culture of complete impunity, a culture that was completely unsafe for them. So yes, I'm disappointed. I would love to see those kind of movements progress and, you know, remain aggressive in Sri Lanka, because Sri Lanka needs movements like that. But it's just not possible when you risk getting killed or being imprisoned and beaten up and all of that.
Thank you very much. Other analogy I give is when people ask, would you like some white wine? No, no. Would you like some red wine? No. Would you like some arak? No. Then what do you like? Don't know. So Aragalaya said what they didn't want, but they never came out with what they want.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mahendra, for that. Okay, we're waiting for further questions.
Hello. Well, in the absence of any other hands, can I ask another one? Do you think that Gotabaya was one way or the other was behind the Easter bombings? Because he was the only beneficiary of that event. Soon after it happened, or within few weeks after that, he announced that he was going to contest the presidential election. And also, knowing the man, he, by hook or by crook, he wanted to become president. And this was, as I said, only beneficiary of this event was him. I know you were not in Sri Lanka at that time, but what are your thoughts on that?
So I have also heard the rumors, I mean, that he was behind that. Do I have any evidence or any proof? I don't. So I really don't know. But yes, I have heard the rumors too, like you. But you're asking me for my thoughts. I mean, I really don't know. You know, whatever we published at the Sunday Leader was backed with documentary and photo evidence whenever we had it with regard to the photos. The documentary evidence we always had. So every time we broke a story, we had proof of that story. So now when you're asking me about this one, I cannot comment because I really have no proof.
Nishant Silva has given his evidence to international jury. What impact will that have on Gota? I know Canada, they have banned him coming. Can he come to the States again, or can this sort of evidence will haunt him somewhere someday?
Nishant Silva's evidence is hugely important. And he has been an extremely important and remains a very important cog in the wheel moving forward as well in terms of bringing accountability against the Rajapaksas and in particular Gotabaya by the international community. We already saw that happen in Canada. The US has refused him entry. Whether they will continue to sustain that or maintain it, I cannot say. But right now, he should not even attempt to come to this part of the world, particularly after Biden recently signed into law, and I forget the exact article number, but anyway, he signed into law this new law that came into effect that said anyone who lives in any other country or any other citizen and is guilty of having committed a crime can be prosecuted the moment they step on US soil. So definitely America is a place Gotabaya Rajapaksa absolutely cannot come to.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Udita. I think the next in line is Shreya. Shreya, you want to come in?
Yeah. Thank you very much for your presentation, Frederica. I'm going to ask quite a different question. You have gone through enormous trauma in your life, and you have completely left your country of birth and gone to a new country and started a complete new life. And what has given you the main strength for you to completely transform yourself in some ways?
Thank you for that question, Shreya. It's an easy answer because it's been my children, the two boys.
I thought as much, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if not for them, you know, I would have had no purpose. I wouldn't have had the will to continue because I very briefly touched on it. Obviously, you know, you leave everything that you're familiar with and you come to a foreign country and you start from scratch. Some of you here, I'm sure, can identify with me on that. And I had two very young children at the time. Yeah, it's been a very hard journey. We did get there finally, but it took years and years. And the only thing that kept me going were the two boys because they adapted that much faster than me, and they grew in this country and they have done extremely well, and that has been my reward.
Thank you. I wish you all the best for you and your family.
Thank you, Shreya.
Thanks, Shreya, for that question. I don't think I'm seeing any hands going up on the screen.
Ajanta has put his hand up.
Oh, has he? Right. Okay. Ajanta?
Frederica, although there is a lot of suspicion that Gotha was behind some of the assassinations, at least, he must have had a big team that took part in it. So is there any evidence of an individual identification of these perpetrators? For sure, is there any evidence of people who are carrying out these assassinations and other atrocities?
Yes, definitely, there is evidence. And yes, you are right, he had teams. And actually, quite a few of these individuals who operated even in these death squads have been identified. Some suspects were arrested, I think, in the period between 2015 and 2019. But you see, it all came to nothing. I mean, this is why Nishanta Silva had to flee the country. This is why Shani Abesekar remains under house arrest, because these are police officers with integrity who were doing their job right, and they became the persecuted. And then those that had been arrested and all were just released, right? They were allowed to go free. The moment Rajapaksa became president, all the investigations were stalled. They were stopped. So yes, of course, there are teams. Of course, there are dozens of other people involved. And yes, a lot of them are known, but they continue to live freely.
Their names, are they in public domain, or but they are in, obviously the police know who they are, but they are not, the names are not open to the public, are they?
Well, I do know with relation to Lasanta's killing, I mean, there are court documents that are there in the public domain, should anyone want to take those documents and have published them. And there are names in those documents. So yeah, there are some names out there.
So is there any chance that those people will become witnesses, state witnesses? Or is that too much to expect?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that I really don't know. There is only if they pursue investigations and, you know, pursue with the case. And I really don't know.
I suppose I could hypothesize a response to that, Ajanta. The difficulty back home is the extent to which you become party to corruption. And I think if you try to point your finger at one person, very soon your own cupboard will be opened and skeletons will be exposed. I think that's one of the problems. And that's, I believe, is part of the problem that Ranil Wickremesinghe faces today. I don't know what the other people feel about it. Some thoughts will be welcome on it.
Well, clearly, Richard D'Souza was pre-Rajapaksa era, wasn't it? So was it sort of STF-backed group, or so where did those the orders come from? From what angle?
I mean, Richard was killed under Premadasa's watch.
Yes.
So did the orders come from him? Probably.
So let's say Premadasa's son gets elected. It's in his interest not to open this can of worms. Isn't that right?
Perhaps, yes.
So there is really no hope of bringing justice in Sri Lanka in that case.
Yeah, when I was asked the question even earlier, if I could name any one person who could bring about accountability and justice, I said I couldn't. And that, could Sajith Premadasa make a difference? I don't know. It does not in any way mean that he is like his father or will behave as his father did. Probably he will not. But does it also mean that he can be courageous and independent enough to bring all these perpetrators to justice? I really don't know. I don't think so, to be honest.
Yeah, it is a sad situation, really, isn't it?
It is. It is very, very sad. It's gone on for so long in Sri Lanka, and it's so firmly entrenched in the political arena that can it be completely flipped? It seems very unlikely. It certainly is unlikely in the current makeup.
So in a nutshell, Frederica, what is the future?
Unfortunately, it's very bleak for Sri Lanka. You know, as we all know, I mean, look at the current situation in the country. It's the economy, it's completely broken. And then look at what almost everyone there is facing. I mean, the situation is extremely bleak. And like I said earlier, I mean, this is a train wreck in fast motion.
Anyone else with questions? Otherwise, I will put my questions to Frederica. I got a few more.
Just a quick one, Sati.
Sure.
On the same theme that Jansz-The was bringing in, one of the things that happened when the Rajapaksas were temporarily beaten and Sirisena and Wickremesinghe came into power, there was a lot of hope that things will change, that the rule of law will prevail, and the killers of Lasantha might be brought to justice. But actually, nothing happened. Every time I question people, they say, oh, give a little time. These people will do it, but they won't just do it off the cuff. They need good evidence, and they will do it. And months pass, years pass, nothing happened. So that is why I'm also asking, who is potentially capable? Is it somebody that we don't know about, yet to come through a revolution, or is it just a pure guessing game? We have no identifiable person or group at the moment who can restore order.
Again, so like you rightly said, between 2015 and 2019, even I had a lot of hope. I actually hoped that at least where Lasantha's killing was concerned, his killers would be brought to justice, and it did not happen. Was I surprised that it did not happen? Absolutely not. I have never expected much of Ranil Wickremesinghe, and I have consistently been proved right. So you see, there is no moral willpower to bring about that accountability, to bring about that justice. There is a complete lack of willpower. There is a lack of everything. It's integrity and accountability, and that is why this culture of impunity continues in Sri Lanka. It's irrespective who is president and who is prime minister.
Badly true, yeah. Thank you.
Well, before I put my question to you, Frederica, I see Ruan is back. Ruan is someone who tends to delve deep into all these things, whether the subject is nepotism or politics or whatever. Ruan, can I invite you to raise any issues that you may have?
Sorry, it's quite late night here, but I was there throughout it. I was driving and I was using my phone to participate. So I was there from the very beginning, although I had to log off from the computer into my phone. So let me take the role of the devil's advocate, or the devil himself, as Sati would call me sometimes. My question is, we are seeking legal justice, and the legal processes, the same legal processes, indicate that somebody is not guilty until proved otherwise. Now, we all heard that the evidence is there, but the problem is that in Sri Lanka, nobody is taking the first step of taking the culprits to justice. So if the evidence is there, isn't there a chance that privately or otherwise, that evidence could be presented at an international court somewhere and take these people to justice? There's no point in waiting until that happens in Sri Lanka. If not, why not that evidence is presented in an international arena?
Well, that's exactly what happened with relation to Lasantha's case. And that is what happened at the International Tribunal last year, where justice somewhat was served when the tribunal concluded that the Rajapaksa's government was responsible for Lasantha's killing. So yes, you are right, that evidence can be taken to an international court, and there can be some resolution, some conclusions arrived at, like what happened with regard to Lasantha's killing. So it did happen, yes. But having said that, when his killers continue to be protected in their country of birth, which is Sri Lanka, you see that the justice does not play out there.
Can I just clarify that, Frederica, with regards to what you just said, because I don't think I followed the case in full. When Ahimsa Vikramatunga took this matter up abroad, I think it was in the States, wasn't it?
It was the States. I am not referring to that one, because that actually got thrown out. I am referring to the International Tribunal hearings that happened in Geneva.
And what was the outcome? Did they rule against the Rajapaksas?
Yes, they did. I'm quickly looking it up to give you the correct, so that I don't just give you. So it was heard at the People's Tribunal.
Right.
And let me quickly tell you what.
Is that the one Nishantha gave evidence?
Yes, that is the one where he gave evidence. And then I'm trying to get to the, I mean, there's no point you telling me everything that happened at the tribunal. I'm trying to get to the conclusion. But the conclusion was, where is it? Was that the Rajapaksas were guilty.
And perhaps I could draw a conclusion from that, and also from what you said, that such tribunals do not have any clout in terms of sanctions, to the extent that at the end they fizzle out into nothing. Am I right?
Well, I won't say nothing. So see the indictment at the People's Tribunal alleged the government's complicity in failing to protect Lasantha Vikramatunga. That was, you know, and then of course the government was invited to exercise its right of defense during the hearing, which I'm not sure, I don't think they did. But anyway, but I guess, I mean, at first it might look like nothing, but all of these do mean something. So because the international community does take note of these hearings and what comes out of them. Now, does it translate into any kind of action in Sri Lanka? No, unfortunately. But it does not mean that on the international stage, on the global stage, that there are no consequences. Those consequences do happen. They may not happen as strongly or as vigorously as we all want to see it, but they do happen.
Yes, but in the event, sorry to prolong this discussion on the same subject, in the event someone who lives in a place like Sri Lanka, like a frog in the well, who is protected from all directions, is not going to be bothered by it, and therefore will carry on with impunity. And I suspect that's what is happening.
I am not sure that they are not bothered by it. I mean, I would, and I'm only guessing here, but I would certainly hazard a guess that Gotabaya Rajapaksa is bothered, because look, he did, the time he got overthrown and all of that happened, he did try to get to the US. He has family here and he did try to get here, and he was refused entry. So yeah, I mean, because there are consequences of these hearings, there are consequences that do happen on a global stage. I mean, for sure, he will not be allowed entry into Canada. We all know that now. So like I said, it does play out. It does play out. And I'm sure he is bothered.
Thank you. And what about Ahimsa's case? On what technical ground was it thrown out?
The one in the US?
Yes.
The one in the US was separate because I believe at the time he was president and he did have presidential immunity. I would need to look that up, but I'm pretty, it was based on that pretty much.
Okay, because again, if I were to play devil's advocate, at least the questions that are posed onto me when I discuss these matters is particularly by those who defend the actions of the president would say, well, this was thrown out and therefore he is not guilty. And that is the stance taken by them.
Right, but it wasn't thrown out because he was not guilty. Absolutely not. It didn't even get to being heard to find out if he was guilty or not. So it wasn't thrown out because of that. No.
Okay, thank you. And I think Ruan raised the question about private. I know this is not your domain, nor is it mine, but at least from a point of common sense, we might be able to discuss and decipher something out of it. But in response to Ruan's question, I suspect that the option of a private prosecution is available to any Sri Lankan should they wish to go along that path. Of course, with a caveat, private prosecutions don't necessarily work if there is political power wielded around the cases. Am I right?
You know, this is not my field of expertise, so I really don't want to comment. Again, it would be guesswork. I tend to agree with you, but then that's just a guesstimate.
Thank you. Ruan, you got anything to say about that?
Yeah, I certainly do. And I was just checking the People's Tribunal summary, and what they say is the prosecutor holds the Democratic Socialist Republic of Sri Lanka responsible for grave violation of the international human rights of journalist Lasantha Wickrematunge, specifically the right to life, the right to freedom of expression, and the right to an effective remedy.
Are you going to make your bread?
Sorry. Did you hear me? Hello?
Yeah, I think there was some interference, but I think I heard you, so I would presume that
you heard.
you.
So basically the point I'm trying to make here is the People's Tribunal did not hold any particular individual responsible. They said the government of Sri Lanka is responsible for violation of human rights of Lasantha Wickrematunge, right? So once again, we are coming back to square one, where we believe that a certain individual or individuals are responsible, but up to now, not in the tribunal, nor in any other place, any of those individuals have been prosecuted, and we believe that there is some evidence somewhere, but until that evidence come out, I don't think it is fair for us to make the accusation. Well, we can make the accusations, but I don't think the legal process has to complete before making somebody guilty.
You are right. The tribunal did say the government of Sri Lanka, and it did bring an indictment on the government of Sri Lanka in relation to the murder of Lasantha. And in a way, it does say to bring its murderers to justice, adding to President Gotabaya Rajapaksa's, mounting international problems. So again, I can only reiterate that these issues add to his, because on a global stage, they do take note of these indictments, the conclusions that are made here. And I agree 100%. I mean, he has to be brought to trial and his case heard and then decided whether if he is guilty or not. It all needs to, there is a whole another process that needs to be followed.
I suppose, Ruan, to respond to you, I would argue that if a government is found responsible, every member of the government is collectively held responsible. In the event, he must take a share. The culpability is the question. It's not finding someone guilty to the core. That can be difficult in these situations. But once the blame is apportioned, I think everyone should take responsibility, and he hasn't. He could have at least conceded and said, sorry, he didn't do it, but his government was responsible. He didn't do that. Being a statesman, he should have done it. That is the view I take. But anyway, none of us are legal experts, so we won't dwell on it for too long. Anyone else?
Yeah, can I ask another question?
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, so we have discussed many crimes or murders and murders done by them. But some other thing which has gone under the carpet is the many killings of criminals who have been arrested by the police. And we hear the same story over and over again. They're taken somewhere to show some weapons and they're bumped off. So just to ask Frederica, is how much of the political establishment in Sri Lanka is under obligation to the underworld? The reason I ask is I feel that the reason for the police to kill them is to prevent the evidence coming out in the courts. I don't know whether Frederica has got opinion on that.
Yes, I mean, I think I said it even in my speech. Sri Lanka's politicians and their thugs, they cannot appear to survive without their stooges and their thugs. So that is very real. That's a very real makeup of Sri Lanka's political world or politicians in Sri Lanka. It is absolutely real. I don't know if that answers your question, but if you are asking me, are all politicians, I mean, that's a very broad assumption. Are some politicians directly connected to members of the underworld? Yes, this is something I have written about and exposed during my time as a Sunday leader.
But one of the tragedies of Sri Lanka is that, amongst many, is that the law enforcement in every country, as well as the police, is supposed to be protecting people, preserving life, whereas in Sri Lanka, all the crimes have been linked to the law enforcement agencies. So they have become a private army of the politicians to do their dirty work, and that is that is very, very bad for any country. And recently it was mentioned in the news that that over the last few years, out of 180 odd police stations, the inspectors they have selected, out of that 120 have been on just political sort of interference. So that's where the law and order of the country is. So unfortunately, at the end of the day, the police and the law enforcement is just a criminal branch of the politicians.
100%. Yes, I couldn't agree more.
Thank you, Rita. I think I'm seeing both Ajanta's hand and Ruan's hand up. Are you still there?
Yeah, well, can I digress from political murders into another branch of criminal activity? During the Yahapalne government, they appointed the FCID, and there was quite a lot of hope that the financial irregularities would be exposed. Do you have much information on that, Frederica?
I don't. I am sorry. Yeah, this was after my time, and no, I really don't have a lot of information.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask some? Can I speak, please? I am Indrani Anthony Pillai.
Can you give me a second? Let Ruan come in and then it's your turn, Indrani.
Okay.
Sati, probably I'll let Indrani, because I have spoken already. I'll let Indrani go before me.
Oh, thank you, Ruan. I'm Indrani Anthony Pillai, Miss Jansz. I am also a member of Methodist College. I'm a Tamil, and I left Ceylon in 1978. I'm very, very upset that things are not really going to be solved in the recent times for me. I'm really surprised, not surprised, I wouldn't say, use the word surprise. I can't quite understand how uneducated and how militant we have become in Sri Lanka. And I'm very sorry to hear from you, Frederica, that it's not going to be solved in the future anyway. And I was thinking my grandchildren can go to Sri Lanka and enjoy the world. And I, like you, I feel a bit un-Sri Lankan in a way, because we are second-class country, and second-class citizen in this country, that's UK. And it's the same for everyone who is away. But we would like to know that our homeland is doing well. And it is sad. It's very sad. I mean, it's not only politically, I'm very involved, but in the sense I try to get all the information that I can. But it's very, very sad. Thank you very much anyway, Frederica. Wish you all the best in your life.
Thank you, Indrani. And like you, I mean, yes, I can so relate. I want to go back. I mean,
I like my children to go back.
Yeah, and my 2 children want to go back too. Certainly not to live, but at least on holiday. In 11 years, we have not been able to even go back on holiday. And of course, we still love the country. Sri Lanka is a beautiful country.
Yes.
And it has so much to offer, but it's just that you mentioned something extremely important when you were speaking, and that is education. So when you said something like, why are people so uneducated? I mean, I think this is the core problem of why there is such a horrific breakdown in society in Sri Lanka. It's a lack of education. It's a lack of standardizations. It's a lack, the system no longer works. When I was speaking briefly about America, I mean, look, at the end of the day, in these countries, why these countries are great or so much better than Sri Lanka, and similarly in the UK as well, is because the systems do work. I think it was Sati who mentioned at some point about corrupt British politicians and how they've had to resign. Yes, the system works there, unlike in Sri Lanka. This is the huge difference.
I know. It's very sad.
It is.
I'm listening to you, I was thinking, my goodness me, this is Sri Lanka, and we are putting it in a coffin.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, I think the nails are going one by one. It's a slow process. Now, since Ruan has been extremely generous, can I let Sankar in and then come to Ruan? Yes, Sankar, it's your turn.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much, Arya. Firstly,
If you
for
can
inviting.
introduce yourself.
Yes, I'm Nathan Sankar. I'm batchmate of Arya, and we worked in the same specialty until recently. Thank you for your invitation, Arya, to listen to this wonderful talk by Frederica Jansz, who I'm very grateful to have given this talk. Got a lot of insights, and you alluded to in your last answer to the situation currently in Britain, where a senior minister, in fact, chairman of the ruling party, was forced to resign. But this was possible only through the actions of a journalist. And you rightly pointed out how the system enables it. And that is very much important in countries like Sri Lanka. I know you had very bad experience. You risked your life. But what you and your colleagues have exposed over the years is what has enabled us even now to discuss about how to get justice. So somehow I hope this spirit of investigative journalism continues despite against all the odds in Sri Lanka. Just to, before I finish, I thought I would just highlight an anecdote. Over 100 years ago, a journalist was forced to run away from Turkey because he was against the government. And he came to UK, married in UK, and one of his great grandson was our prime minister until September last year. That's a different question. Maybe he left a bad legacy, but journalists having to flee has been, historically there have been many instances. And Frederica, your experience is similar to that. And I wish you all the best in your current career. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Sankar, for that question. Can I just check on you? You are a Benedictine. Did you know Lasantha back home?
No, not personally, no.
Okay, because he also went to St. Benedict's.
Benedict, okay.
Yeah, maybe he was possibly junior to you. Given our age, I think most of them are junior. Yes, it's Ruan. Thank you for.
Thank you. No problem. Thank you very much, Sati. I know that lots of people in this forum brand me as a stooge to particular politician or political party, but I'm not, as you already know.
But have you got the evidence?
Pardon?
Have you got the evidence?
Because I'm called so many names, as you know, including yourself. Anyway, joking apart. So my point is, I'm talking as a law-abiding citizen. The law states that, as I've repeatedly said, the law states that a particular person should be not guilty, deemed not guilty until proved otherwise. Now, today I have heard, sorry, Frederica, this is not a question to you, this is a comment actually, so you don't need to respond to this. I heard particularly Udita making lots of allegations against the police, the armed forces, even the judiciary. Now, this is opening libel action against him. You see, because when people make repeated allegations without being able to prove what they are saying, and there's no evidence provided in courts, that is basically, it is wrong. So what I'm trying to say is, it's making such public allegations is not right, because either you have to provide the evidence or you have to stop making continuously these allegations. So as I said, it's not a question, Frederica, you need to answer, but that's my observations as a law-abiding citizen, simply because if somebody makes an allegation against me, especially if it is a false allegation, I don't like people going on and on with that and not even giving me a chance to prove myself in courts that I'm not guilty. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Ruan. I mean, you are right to say that everybody is innocent until proven guilty. But that said, that is exactly what we have all been discussing here, is for people need to be brought to justice. That trial needs to play out. The allegations are there. The allegations will not go away until and unless that trial takes place. And it is that accountability that we are all seeking.
And also, I think if the chairman could have a last word on that, Ruan, I would argue that given the number of allegations that are prevalent today, I mean, you look at YouTube, it's willy-nilly. You look at the newspapers back home, it's willy-nilly. Given the status quo, the people who get offended by such allegations could have gone to court by now. They haven't done it. And coming back to the minister's case in this country, in the UK, it was a journalist who went on hounding the minister, despite legal threats, finally managed to expose the wrongdoing. So I think we have to take a balanced view on this matter. And I will close that and move on to the next question. I can see Mahendra's hand up again.
Sorry if I keep coming back, Sati. I would very much like to know what Frederica thinks of my little hypothesis. When several parties contest an election in a democratic system, one of the things they have to do is to see how they can get the majority of votes. And this sometimes leads to compromise in principles. I'm not saying that's right, but it is so. Because they say, if we put this forwards, we'll never win. So therefore, we had to put it behind and not talk about it, for example. I mean, for example, in Britain, there was a mood for Brexit, and people who were against Brexit didn't have a chance. Or there's a green movement. So if you are thoroughly green, whatever the policies are, you want the green person to come, and you tend to forget or forgive the other errors. Now, I'm saying this leading up to something I have noticed in Sri Lanka. This may be totally unfair, but this is what I noticed. We Sri Lankans tend to forgive the practice of taking some money for favors, paga, and so on. They say, oh, so long as they improve the motorways and have the structures, if they take a little bit of money, that's okay. They have done a lot for the country. And the fiscal honesty is not very high up. I was at a meeting with a group of friends in Sri Lanka a few years ago, and they were discussing how terrible and corrupt the politicians are. And this person got a bit late. We asked, why do you get late? Oh, I was stopped by the police for speeding at 40 miles per 30 miles, but I gave him 1,000 rupees and he let me go. Ha, 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 ha. So that's okay, to bribe the policeman to get away is okay. So there is this policy of people feeling that it's okay to give some money to get some favors. After all, they are in need, poor chaps, so on. It's not strong enough. I may be wrong. Other thing is, there are other majority issues which matter to political parties. And sometimes voters will forgive deficiencies in other areas if they stand for this, what they feel are important principles for the nation. It may be language, it may be ethnicity, whatever it is. But so the majority of people who want that will forgive other demeanors and so on. Well, okay, they are not completely straightforward, but who is straightforward? The only honest politician is looking for an honest politician, like looking for a virgin in a brothel. So we have to compromise. So I was wondering whether we have this culture of not wanting to be perfectly honest and ready to compromise and thereby compromise principles. Now, am I totally wrong in this?
You are not at all. And like I said previously, I mean, the system is completely broken in Sri Lanka. So you were talking about bribes and how people are so amenable to even giving bribes, and then how people will elect politicians based on a nationalistic or populist platform, which is what happened with Mahinda and then Gotabaya, and they forgive everything else, or appear to forgive and appear to forget. it's because the entire system is so broken in Sri Lanka at every single level.
Right, right. So I'm not alone in my thinking.
Can I come in?
Yeah, please do, Ajanta.
Frederica, you told us, well, during this discussion, we have sort of alluded to many things. The government is corrupt. The police is corrupt. The government is in cahoot with the underworld. Now, coming back to what Ruan said, everybody is innocent until they are proven to be guilty. So that means we have to solely depend on the judiciary. Do you think our judiciary is not corrupt or cannot be manipulated? Do you think we can bring these culprits to justice? Do you have an opinion on that, please?
I can only respond by speaking from my experiences in Sri Lanka, where I have written about, highlighted corrupt members of the judiciary. So to answer your question directly, when you ask me, do I think there are any members, a part of the judiciary who are not corrupt? I'm sure there are. Are there members who are? Absolutely. I have written about this. I have produced evidence to this effect. I have even had a judge resign and been sacked based on the evidence that was produced and published in the Sunday Leader. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. So isn't it true that a corrupt government will get rid of the judges who are independent, who have a clean record, and appoint their own corrupt judges to give judgments against them, and thereby be absolved of their crimes?
I mean, I think we've seen that happen on consecutive occasions in Sri Lanka. So yes, of course, it does happen.
So Ruan's argument doesn't really stand any ground. If we don't have a non-corrupt judiciary, we can't bring these people to justice. So there is absolutely no hope for the situation to be changed. Even changing the government, as I pointed out before, that some of the murders were by previous governments, so they will not bring the murderers to justice because there will be fingers pointed at them. So in my opinion, Sri Lanka is crying for a system change, which will probably not happen in our lifetime.
Unfortunately and sadly, yes. Because again, I cannot emphasize enough, every system in Sri Lanka is broken. And for that change to happen about, it's going to be massive. Will we see it in our lifetime? Perhaps not.
If I may just add to what Frederica has just commented, Ajal, I can clearly talk from experience of having a little bit of reading. I think there are two issues here. One is corruption, but corruption is not the sole issue. More important is an independent judiciary. Now, a dependent judiciary will not necessarily be corrupt, but it will be partisan. And in a country like ours, where political clout is excessive, it is very difficult to ensure that the independence that you and I like would prevail. It can drop and it can improve. Go back to the time that we were students. We had people like Victor Thenako, now that's the only name that comes to my mind, and H.W. Thambaya, senior Supreme Court judges. And not one case, if you look through them, criminal and otherwise, you wouldn't find that many flaws, whereas you will find many today. That is basically the loss of quality in the judiciary. If you appoint Tom, Dick, and Harry to the higher benches, then that is likely to happen. I'm not saying that everyone is guilty of being a Tom, Dick, and Harry, but I think the situation is getting worse.
Hmm.
I don't know whether Frederica would agree with me, but that's my take on it.
I do.
I agree with you.
Mhm. I do too, Sadi. Yes, absolutely.
Okay, now I can't see any more hands, so let me ask my question.
I have. Can I just want to comment on
Sure.
what Ruan said earlier. He did mention my name. The thing is, he asked whether there's evidence. Yes, the evidence had been produced in the international court, and they have passed verdicts on that. So evidence is there. Why wasn't the criminals had been given the proper judgment in Sri Lanka? How can you give a proper judgment on a criminal when the murderer is at the top of the government? He dismantled everything against him, all the investigations, all the investigators, and he had absolute absolute power. Means he could appoint judges. Who is the mad person who will appoint, give free hand to, if he's the murderer, will he give a free hand to his judiciary and the police to investigate his crime? That was what I was telling. The evidence is there. Evidence has been shown in the international jury, and there's no hiding from it. What we need is the independent judiciary, as well as independent investigations, because judiciary cannot judiciary will work on the investigational evidence they are provided. So both should be in hand, but it is wrong to say that there's no evidence. The evidence is there in the international jury.
I agree. Yep.
Okay, it's Ruan, I think, next.
Yes, I don't know how else to explain this. Udit, I think you have got it entirely wrong. The international jury did not convict a particular person. They just convicted the Sri Lankan government for not preserving the fundamental rights of Lasantha Wickramatunge.
The evidence is there. They have if you go through the evidence, they name who did it. Of course, the international jury doesn't have that power, but the evidence is there. You said that evidence was not there. No, evidence is there. Evidence is there. Evidence was crushed, or the processes were crushed in Sri Lanka by the murderer to prevent his cases. Simple as that. If there's independent judiciary, and if there's independent investigations, then all will come out. Give that, and then the culprits will be judged.
Okay, you're using certain words which you have already accused, not accused, you've already convicted somebody. I entirely disagree with that. But the point I'm trying to tell you is that there are other countries, like Philippines. Marcos has been convicted and all the money has been brought back to the country, right? So even if you accuse Sri Lankan judiciary as being corrupt, and even if you accuse that some person or one person has subdued the judiciary, there is still potential to provide that evidence in an international court and get justice. Without doing that, there is no point in just harping on this with allegations such as murderers.
Well, Marcos's this thing took ages. Give time, and if there's independent judiciary, it will come out. That's what I'm saying.
Let us all live in hope, and my hope is that the gateway to nirvana will open in the future, hopefully. Can I now, I'm just checking whether there's anyone else putting the hand up. I can't see any. So let me just return to what I wanted to touch on and elicit from Frederica's CV. Frederica, you have mentioned about being a guest speaker in not one, but 3 universities have been mentioned. University of Washington, University of Seattle, and the other one is not a university, but it's the Oslo Freedom Forum. Can you give us a hint as to what exactly the themes and the gist of your lectures were on?
Always, it was about the press freedom or the lack of it in Sri Lanka. Always. So that was always the theme, and that was the topic of my presentation in Norway at the Oslo Freedom Forum in 2014 as well.
Okay, and what about the your tenure as a senior research fellow with the Institute of Commonwealth Studies in London?
Mm-hmm. So during my 3-year tenure there, I was asked to comment mostly on cases of asylum from Sri Lanka, why people were fleeing, what the different categories were, because not everybody is a political victim. And then what happens when they arrive in countries like the UK, for example, how do these immigrants survive? So it was a research study, and that was pretty much what it encapsulated.
Thank you very much. And I think there's one other thing I just wanted to check. The question of public interest is a big theme in the West. Mm-hmm. And I believe that much of your work and your predecessor, Lasantha's work, and the other slain journalists were all into the same theme of public interest, because the investigative journalism is always about the public interest in wanting to reveal the truth. And mm-hmm. you probed the truth and you searched for the truth. Did you see the relevance, or maybe I got to word this question right, to what extent did you think that such a theme was relevant to Sri Lanka? Because having grown up there and having seen all what was going around me, I always thought that the public interest is not an issue for the Sri Lankans. To illustrate my point, I think we are a confused society. If you look back at recent history, there was a time the 6.9 million voters elected the government, and then now they are being blamed. And then came a man with no single vote backing him, and now we are blaming him. And in the context, what does public interest, or is it relevant to the Sri Lankan public or the politicians?
100%. My gosh, yes. And frankly, I think there has been a huge uptake, if that's the right word, in public interest in Sri Lanka, particularly over the last year or last couple of years. I mean, the whole Aragale movement, for example. But then I think you're asking me, I think your question is slightly different. You're asking me how relevant is it to the very fabric of Sri Lanka?
Yes, basically, what does it matter to Sri Lankan society, given that they have no choice in electing their rulers? When I say no choice, I'm talking about them having very limited choice. To me, it is a lack of choice. So it is right or the left. And that is the sort of way we have swung since independence. And that is probably why we have been traveling backwards. And in that context, does it matter to our society, matters of public interest?
100% it does, because you see, it is public interest that brings you or helps you to fight injustice and to help empower and advocate for disenfranchised individuals and communities. You see, it gives you the flexibility to develop a set of courses that is tailored to your interests and, you know, the country's interests, the nation's interests. It gives you a solid and substantive grounding, for example, that will help a people's movement even. So yes, I mean, public interest is absolutely 100% necessary and vital for a society, for a whole nation.
Thank you very much. I think I saw a phone holder. It's Galaxy something. I don't know the name of the gentleman. It's 255. Can you come in, sir? Galaxy J2 Core 255366. The owner of the mobile phone. I can see
Yeah.
the hand.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. And may I ask you to introduce yourself, madam?
Yeah, I'm Indra Kanti Pereira. I just a comment, just to say how happy I am to see Frederica. I have, she may not remember, but I have experienced a very not so widely known, but a very brave episode in her life that she came to the, she went to interview Jane Russell in the Mirihana police station. So, and I'm so sad that we are still at square one. And I wish you well, Frederica. I was listening almost with tears to what is happening. I hope everything's fine with you. That's all.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And this is why these forums are so amazing, that we can connect again. And yes, I do remember you. And oh my gosh, of course, Jane Russell, she was an icon. But yes, it is extremely sad. I mean, it's very sad what's happening in Sri Lanka. It's sad that some of us can't even go back. I don't know, as like all of you here, I hope and pray that things will get better. I want so much for it to be better.
Thank you.
Thank you, Indrani.
Thank you.
It looks like there aren't further questions. So perhaps we can wind up the session with my last question. It's a bit of a philosophical sort of $64,000 question, but I'm very much interested in your response. Taking a global view, a 360-degree view of Sri Lankan politics, along with the history, the journey that we have had for the last 70 odd years. I mean, it's going to be 75, isn't it, next month? Sorry, 74, did you say?
February 4th. 75.
I think next 5th of February will be 75, I think.
It is 75.
Yeah.
It is 75.
Yeah. So the question is, with the geopolitics that is developing around us today, while we go around with the begging bowl, we, I think for a number of years, had an ethnic conflict seeking division of the country. Then the whole thing turned into a complicated issue with interreligious disharmony, interracial disharmony, and so on. Do you think the country will have the right for self-rule in the next 50 years with the Indians and the Chinese around us? I always called our politicians, and as our country as a paradise of fools.
Mhm.
Am I right or wrong?
You are right. And I mean, will Sri Lanka be able to maintain its independence moving forward, given the massive debt that it is in to China and India? I don't think it's even independent anymore. I mean, yes, we have so-called independent figures in public office, but then is there anything to celebrate? Because you mentioned the fact that we are just coming up to its 75th anniversary of independence. I don't know. I mean, that country needs fixing. People, their issues need to be addressed first. I don't even believe anymore that this is a celebration or this is an anniversary that should be celebrated.
Thank you very much. And if there aren't any further questions, I think it would be appropriate. It would be an
Okay.
appropriate. Sorry, one more question.
Not actually question, a comment to make, Sati, before it's a finished comment as well.
Yeah.
Frederica, as I have mentioned in the chat, I may have different convictions, I may have different beliefs in what the law and order is. Whichever it is, I really salute you for the courage. You have courageous steps you have taken. I don't think I will ever be brave enough to do anything like what you have done. And I think Sri Lanka is sorely missing somebody who's that brave. And I wish you all the very best. Thank you.
Thank you, Rowan. I can only reiterate that it is people like you and all of you in this forum that have made it so worthwhile for me. So thank you.
Can I, sorry, who else is next?
I was going to say, Indrani here, I was going to say, thank you very much, Frederica, and wish you all the best in your life. And I hope we Sri Lankans will have a better life. Thank you.
Thank you, Indrani. Thank you.
Mahendra,
Can I make a comment? Frederica, you were seeking truth all your life through your journalism. Of course, you're in States now, but I hope the effort you put into Sri Lanka seeking truth will someday we will find truth in various matters you have raised. And I think that will be a tribute to what you have done as a journalist, as well as Lasantha and many others. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rita. I can only hope so too. And again, it wasn't just me. There were so many of us, right, that fought for that truth and justice. So yes, I hope Lasantha left a huge legacy. I mean, then there was Keith Noya, there was even Sivaram, there's so many. I hope that for all their sakes, that they did not die in vain.
Thank you. Mahendra, would you like to say a few words?
Just to firstly thank Frederica for appearing on our forum and being so totally frank and honest. I really admire people who are like that. And even before I saw you today, I have read about you, heard about you, and nothing but admiration for you. And like I said, when I asked that question, I'm always fascinated about what drives people into doing things, forsaking sometimes their lives and exposing themselves to untold dangers. So that speaks for the strength of character of the people. And today you have been very forthright and honest and answered our questions extremely well. Thank you very much, Sati and Ruan, for organizing this. And thank you very much for all the people who participated. Udita, as usual, speaking his heart out and without fear, something I admire in Udita. And once again, Frederica, all the best to you with your young family, and our hopes are with you. Our good wishes are with you and our admiration is with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mahendra, for that. And I think there is one thing that is that I have left out. I think this is something I touched on. It's a personal question, so you don't need to respond to it if it is irrelevant or intrusive. I asked you whether any of the Sri Lankan stalwarts have done anything to remedy it's difficult to meet justice to you because of what has happened. I don't think there is adequate compensation that one could envisage for a person like you who had so much torment to go through. But at least as a token gesture, has any of the Sri Lankan top men or women, for that matter, taken your case and try to address at least some of the concerns that you would have raised in the past? Or is it just a forgotten saga?
When you say some of the concerns, do you mean with relation to public accountability and some of those in relation to some of the stories we brought?
Not really, because I think that is something I wouldn't expect them to repair or remedy. But in terms of the personal damage done to you,
okay,
to the extent of you seeking exile from the country because of the harassment, torment, and the threats.
They have done nothing, and I'll give you just one small example. So currently, there is an arrest warrant that remains active against me in Sri Lanka, which is why we cannot return. Which is, well, the boys could go back, but I mean, obviously, they're worried that they will get harassed. I cannot go back because I will be arrested at the airport. And I have reached out to politicians, you know, I have spoken with lawyers. Of course, I have been advised by my lawyers who were in Sri Lanka not to even attempt it yet. But yes, I have reached out to various politicians asking them if they will put that warrant aside so I can come home or go home just on holiday. And nobody has done anything. So if that answers your question. So no, I suppose they're all glad I'm out of the country.
That is including the current regime.
Including the current regime, yes.
Right. Because I only asked that question in the context of the links R.W. Ranil had with Lasantha in the past, because Lasantha was his secretary, wasn't he, one time?
He was a long time ago, yes.
Yes. So I thought the man would have made some effort to repair at least part of the damage done. And it's very interesting that he hasn't done anything.
I mean, this is a man who didn't even pursue with the investigation into Lasantha's murder. So what more can you expect? And when Ranil was prime minister in that period between 2015 and 2019, I think, I did speak with Malik Samaravikrama himself on a number of occasions about this arrest warrant. And all Malik would tell me was, oh, you can just come back, don't worry about it. He did nothing, because when I had lawyers check, they said, don't even attempt it. You will be stopped and arrested at the airport.
Thank you very much for that response. And now I think perhaps it's time to say a big thank you to you. It's 2 hours, I think, now, since we started this session on a Sunday, taking much of your precious time. And might I just compliment you by returning to the title. We called you a formidable woman, and you said you are not. And I agree 100%, because you're not formidable anymore because you don't have to be. You are a free person. But the fact that you were formidable is an undeniable fact. On that note, Frederica, thank you very much indeed, and may God bless you. If you come this way to London, please contact us. We could have another session with you.
I would love to. And thank you for this opportunity today. It has been amazing. It has been wonderful to meet with you all, to be able to interact and to share at least some of my story. So thank you.
Much pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Goodbye for now.
Bye.
I,
Yes.